Like a fat guy putting on shots, you split your sides at Thursday Thoughts. Welcome to this week's episode of Thursday Thoughts with Eddie Anchor. I'm your host, Eddie Anchor. It is great to be back. I've been able to recharge the batteries, enjoy a few lazy Thursdays off, and now we're back to hit the second half of the season hard. Before we get into everything that's happened in the past 2 weeks while you've been gone, let's get straight into this week's matchups. First up, we got Bunga versus Matt. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the cheekiest of them all? This week, these two brothers in arms will battle it out to decide once and for all, who is the real Bunga? This contest has actually picked up a big head of steam this week. This match has gone global and was featured on the cover of this week's edition of National Geographic. As you can see, they were doing a special edition on world famous twins. Amazingly, these two were picked up to head the article. The magazine, unfortunately, has since gone out of business due to the incredible costs of printing this month's edition in A1 sized paper. The match itself is expected to be a close one, with Bunga's ringhole breathing its first sigh of relief in 30 years as Gary Ablett was let off by the match review panel this week. Not all is well for Matt's superstar Paddy Dangerfield. It has been rumoured that he's carrying a lower back injury. The club has reported it was caused due to a heavy collision injury last week. I suspect it was due to all the heavy lifting he's been doing this year, mainly carrying Matt and his team around. Get around this game because it could spell the end of the season for one of these two in the title race. Bunga by 20. Tricky versus Callum. This week will be an epic game that will decide just how big the canyon between the two halves of the league become. Callum is sitting in 7th position, 8 points behind Tricky, who's sitting in 6th. There is an 8-point gap between the top and the bottom halves of the ladder. With a victory to Tricky here, there could be a giant chasm wedged right down the middle of the league, almost too big to cross for anybody. It could lead to the league effectively being down to 6 with half a season to go. For a victory to even be remotely possible, someone needs to inform Callum there are more than just 2 teams in the league that he's allowed to choose players from. Surely Tricky can't drop this game, can he? I'll be tipping him by 14 points. Robbo versus Chris. The only distance bigger than the number of kilometres between these two from WA to New South Wales is both of their teams' distance away from being any good. With some real stinky performances from both sides this year, it's no wonder they fill 2 of the bottom 4 spots. The only positive to be drawn from a match of this sort is that it will produce at least one of them getting a win. Apparently the Aldinga Sharks felt so bad for Chris's team last week, they've actually offered to lend his team a few players to try and improve their position. There were pistols at 20 paces earlier in the week as the coach of the worst side in the league, Chris, came out. That's all. I noticed no one's surprised. Nah, seriously. He came out and stated that Robbo will be his bitch this week and he's already planning for a week after. In response to this, Robbo has said, who's Chris? How would I know who he is? I don't look at my feet when I'm walking, so why would I be looking that far down when I'm coaching? With the spiteful lead up, this is sure to only be slightly less underwhelming than trying to light your farts on fire. I think the league is going to get a game worthy of the wooden spoon battle. Robbo by 142 points. Steve versus Andy. This match has been dubbed the Dane Rampy Cup. And it's sponsored by Bedford Industries. The league would like to thank Steve's Place of Employment for sponsoring this prestigious award that will be hotly contested every time these two teams meet. The origin of the award stems back to one of the more brilliant trade moves of the season. Steve was actually able to enter the Guinness Book of World Records by being the first man to successfully complete a trade with his brain surgically replaced by that of a chipmunk. There were highly skilled doctors on hand to complete the procedure, but Steve is now the first fully functioning human with an actual chipmunk's brain in his body. Strangely enough, the transplant has actually reduced Steve's desire to have nuts in and around his mouth. trading the most exciting young player in the comp in Chad Wingard for a flat foot run-in-the-mill half-back in Dane Rampy. The jury on whether the surgery was a success is still out. On the other side of the coin, Andy is extremely happy with the trade and is closing in on top spot. He won't be far away after the steamroller runs straight over Steve this week. Andy by 280 points. The Commissioner versus Hayden. Well, all the talk the week has been out of the Commissioner's headquarters that once the bye rounds were done with, there would be a huge upturn in results for his team. With a settled lineup, players back from injury, and the most dominant midfield ever put together in Thunderdome history, the Commish looks set to pin the ears back and really hit the second half of the season hard. Only problem is, first game up out of the byes, he runs into the red-hot team of the comp in Hayden. After a big 300-point win last week, he's just quietly smoking the pipe back and forth, getting ready to launch his assault like his fellow countrymen did back in Pearl Harbor. With Lin Jong, Tom Lee and Cameron Ling all huge inclusions into the team of the Japanese All-Stars this week, Haydos will be looking forward to ending the Commissioner's season himself. Haydos will be looking forward to another huge game from superstar forward Jack Revolt to lead him to victory. Hayden by 127 points. Ben versus Tom. Now, last and probably least, this game is absolutely nothing of anything and is of very little relevance to the overall season. Tom is currently coasting along on top of the league ladder as expected by some of the better fantasy football pundits. And Ben, like water finding its natural level, is right down the bottom of the ladder. The only thing keeping him from the wooden spoon currently is the lead weights tied around Chris's ankles at the bottom. With possibly the worst assembled lineup, I can't actually see Ben getting within 100 points of another team for the rest of the year. Currently relying on Brock McLean to captain his side is the first sign of a quality outfit. Now, then we notice Sean Grigg gets a game. The big Texan is anchoring his forward line freshly back from knee surgery. He's up there alongside superstar Jesse White, who is a bigger flop than Dirk Diggler in Boogie Nights. Pro Hart has painted prettier looking pictures than this team with a chocolate cake and a stick of dynamite. Tom to make an absolute mess of Ben's rabble by 320 points. That's all the matches for the week. Now let's have a look back at the bye rounds while you've been gone. This year's bye rounds were extremely kind to some and extremely cruel to others. In search of a few extra victories, quite a number of teams have come out of the bye rounds in far worse shape than they went in. There was no real ground lost or gained though by most of the teams, as the most any team won was 2 and everybody won at least 1. But at what expense? Steve's team has been completely gutted, trading out superstars like Chad Wingard and dropping a number of quality players has left him with what you would consider the worst list currently in the league. Despite being picked 4, he has managed to ruin his team beyond recognition, with Blixarves tasked with carrying his entire ruck division in McAvoy's absence. It's only a matter of time before he slides all the way to the bottom of the ladder. As we take a look at the ladder, we can see the power struggle at the top continues, with any one of 5 that could be topped by the end of this round. Tom leads overall by 1 game, but Matt and Andy are in red-hot form right behind him. At the other end of the table, a new contender for the spoon has emerged out of the ruck, with Ben putting his hand up to be the first man in Thunderdome history to go from Premier to Wooden Spooner in the space of a season. Not since the Crows in 1999 has there been such a flop after a premiership year. It's going to be an interesting second half of the season, guys. Now, we move on to Free Agent of the Week. This week we're winding back the clock. Rather than going with a young up-and-comer, getting ready to make a breakout game, we're going to go with an old-timer, looking to try and recapture some of his former glory. If he is ever going to have a big week, it will be this week. Two-time Premiership superstar Brad Sewell has been seemingly on the outer of this lightning-quick Hawthorn midfield for the past 2 seasons, and yet remains a walk-up inclusion every time he's fit. This is a testament to his character and determination. This week, he will be looking to fill his stocking with a lot of cheap possessions against a very meek GWS midfield to cement his place in the team moving forward. The bonus with taking Sewell this week is he's actually playing on Sunday, which gives you plenty of time to drop him if you need to use a bench score. Now we move on to Eddie Mail. Thank you very much. That was this week's edition of Eddie Mail. Weekly Wanker. Now, we've really motored through this episode this week, but don't worry, next week we're going to hit the ground running with a real big episode. The Oxford Dictionary defines the word stupid as lacking intelligence or common sense. This describes this week's wanker down to a T. I've seen smarter boxes of hammers than this bloke. Sometimes you just have to look at the bloke and wonder if he's a few sheep short in the top paddock. Not dealing from a full deck. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he grew up drinking paint. Like the competition isn't stacked enough in favour of the players near the top of the league, without giving them a fucking kickstart, how anyone in sound mind would possibly trade out Chad Wingard for Dane Rampy is just absolutely mind-boggling. That is the sort of poor decision-making that has led to this week's wanker being one of the most consistently poor performing teams in Thunderdome history. The problem here is, short of a frontal lobotomy, there's no improvement likely in the future. At least he will be able to fill his trophy cabinets with wooden spoons and weekly wanker awards for years to come. Steve, you fucking moron! Andrew has already got the best team in the league. Did you have to go and give him Wingard as well? Anyway, that's this week's Eddie Anker's Weekly Wanker. Thank you very much for tuning in this week. Sorry for the late and rushed nature of this week's show. All complaints can be directed Tricky Mickey's way. Next week we'll get a chance to really hit the ground running with the usual verb, get the stride out and start getting a few guests back into the studio. Have a great weekend and good luck.
Thursday night is here again, a little after 10:15. The wife's asleep, the children too. That leaves a man with one thing to do. Bring out the laptop, it's time for your date. Settle in and learn your fantasy fate. With a bang, Eddie welcomes you in. He turns his hat, then it's time to begin. The week that was, you might rather forget. Who is the dud and who is the jet? Start the weekend with a dose of the anchor. And laugh your ass off at Weekly Wanker. Like Federer down at the cots. Here's your serve of Thursday thoughts. Like a hobo eating his Watts. Here's your fill of Thursday thoughts. Like a fat guy putting on shorts. You'll split your sides at Thursday thoughts.